Hello everybody and welcome to JTV. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by Rabbi Shaul Rosenblatt, who is a real pioneer when it comes to Jewish education, Jewish communal life. He is the founder and director of the Rabbinical Training Academy here in the UK. He's also the author of a number of books, including Why Bad Things Don't Happen to Good People and Mean What You Pray. And there are a couple of different topics that I wanted to speak to you about, Rabbi. First of all, thank you so much for making the time to be with us here. They include talking about how you sort of deal with and talk to the rabbis that you're training to become communal rabbis in engaging with groups that might feel somewhat marginalized within the Jewish community. I want to talk about prayer and how we can make that a more elevating and engaging experience. Talk about some of the issues that are involved in Jewish outreach and things that perhaps educators and Jewish speakers ought to consider. And also, as your book discusses, the issue of bad things, as you in your words, you say don't happen to good people. The issue of suffering and how we can experience that. And of course, I'm sure your experience of losing your wife had a tremendous impact on the thoughts that you share. So let's start off by talking about marginalized groups. So you train people to become communal figures. That's what your academy does. I have a good friend of mine that's actually currently on your program, and it seems to be really fantastic because for many reasons, but one of them being the broadness and the worldliness with which you try to make your students become. And one of those things is talking to marginalized groups, and so having them speak to people who are part of Jewish communities that may have intermarried, they may have divorced, and that may have affected their place in the community. They may be LGBT. Do you want to talk to us a bit about that and some of your thoughts on that and the points you try to get across as an Orthodox rabbi?
Sure. Just I think what appropriate to tell a little bit of a story and kind of something that happened to me that really spurred me on to set up this program. I was reflecting on it and considering doing it, and then I did a stone setting. I officiated a stone setting. For about 30 or 40 people. And a woman, I would say in her 60s, came up to me afterwards and said, Rabbi, I go to these things all the time at my age, funerals, stone setting, shivers, or all sorts of different events. She said, you're the first rabbi that's ever spoken at one of these things that actually said something meaningful, that actually said something relevant. And I kind of felt that's sad. That's a sad statement, maybe refers of Anglo Jewry. I mean, perhaps she hasn't bumped it the right rabbis. But there was something there. And then on my way home, and I feel, God has his ways. I think he was just kind of pushing me in this direction. I got a call from a student of mine, and he said to me, would you be willing to officiate at the Shiva this week? And I said, for sure. And he said, well, you should know that the man who passed away was gay. So I said, well, fine, it's a good thing to know, but what's the relevance? And he said, but you should also know that sadly he committed suicide. And I said, well, that's terrible, and I'm sorry to hear, that's tragic, but all the more so I'd want to do the Shiva. And he said, well, one last point, you should know that the family cremated him, they didn't bury him. And I said, well, again, of course, I'm happy to do the Shiva. What's any of that got to do with it? And he said, well, the only reason I tell you these things is because a number of rabbis have been approached and didn't want to do it and weren't willing to officiate under such circumstances. And that really touched me and kind of spoke to me and sort of made me feel like, no, this is something I got to do. I think that our rabbis in Anglo Jewry and indeed around the world need to be more human, need to be more sensitive, need to be more aware of the the humanity of others and the challenges that we all face in our lives, and that we're all in the same boat. There isn't kind of an us and them. We're all human beings doing our best in the world, innocently trying to do the best we can. And I think that, I wanted to develop rabbis who have a stronger and deeper feeling of that. And so that's what I do. So, for example, as you mentioned, what we'll do is we'll get together with a group of people who have married out of the faith and just talk to them, just hear what they've got to say. I have a series of questions that I would ask, such as, do you feel welcome in the community? Why do you not feel welcome? How was your experience with shuls? Is your spouse made to feel welcome in the community? I just want these rabbis to kind of hear other human beings. Just hear where they're coming from, see them as real people, not see them as sort of put them in boxes, because nobody's in a box. And the same would be true for LGBT. We have a group of LGBT. Very sadly, actually, I'll give that example. We had recently a group of 4 or 5 gay men and 1 gay woman come and meet with the rabbis. And it was the same type of thing, just a roundtable discussion, just to hear where they're coming from. Have you felt welcome in the Jewish community? Have you not? An important question that I ask is, what could rabbis do to welcome you more, to make you feel more comfortable, to make you want to embrace and engage in Judaism more than you might right now? And the sad thing was that we had 4 men there who were all gay men who grew up in the Orthodox community, who would see themselves as Haredi Jews, and every single one of them, without exception, said they had all either considered suicide or attempted suicide. And again, that says a lot to me about how unwelcoming our community can be, how ununderstanding of the humanity in others, our community and our leaders can be. And I think it's on the shoulders of our leaders to take responsibility to change that. And I feel like if we can train our leaders better, hopefully we can change attitudes, sort of top down.
So what are some of the big take-home messages that you hear from groups that feel marginalized, and what are the messages that you try to give out to not just rabbinic students, but any member of the Jewish community that needs to, could do with being more conscious of some of these things and think about some of the things they could do to make marginalized groups feel more welcome?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you say, it's any member of the Jewish community, and one of the things that kind of this rabbinic training academy has been a stepping stone for me towards has been, I've recently started a podcast. It's called Better Call Shaul. And what I've done is I pretty much, any issue that comes up in my rabbinical training academy, I will kind of do it as a podcast to sort of share with the world as a whole, because I feel anybody can benefit from kind of engaging on this level. But I find that it's different for different people. You can't sort of paint it with broad brushstrokes as how does an intermarried person feel in the Jewish community versus how does a gay person feel in the Jewish community. But there are common themes, and I do think, and on the whole, they feel marginalized, they feel unwelcome, they feel judged. And they feel discouraged from coming and engaging in the Jewish community. It's interesting. One of the take-homes for me was not with this group, but with a previous group of rabbis. We had a group of intermarried couples, and I learn myself as well. I'm learning on the job as I go along. I find this to be an incredibly informative and growth-oriented program for me, even running it. One of the intermarried ladies said that why would somebody think that the choice of my marriage partner has anything to do with my commitment or lack thereof to Judaism. And that really kind of, struck me in the nose that I was like, wow, that's such an interesting thing, because I'd always felt, and I would always been brought up to look at it, that if somebody marries out, they're turning their back on the Jewish community. They're not interested. They don't want to know. They're walking away. And it was really interesting for me to hear, and from my rabbis as well, that's just not necessarily true. It's really not. Somebody falls in love. They've never been brought up with strong enough reasons to want to marry somebody who's Jewish, and so they don't see anything compelling to stop them marrying the person they love, that they love deeply, and is a good partner for them, a good life partner for them. They might be older and they haven't found anybody at this point, and they've maybe tried in the Jewish community and haven't succeeded, and what you want them to stay single for the rest of their lives. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they might be very very sad at that choice, so they might feel they want to engage in Judaism. It matters to them. It's important to them, but they wanted to marry this person, and what's one got to do with the other? And that was a real eye opener for me, and it was an eye opener for a lot of my rabbis as well. And we have a lot of experiences like that on this program, of things that you kind of hear people talking, and you realize, boy, I've been so judgmental. I've been so putting people in boxes. I've been so not listening to human beings and seeing who they are on a deeper level. And I feel that's a big part of what I'm trying to do on the program. I want my rabbis to listen better. If I can say one thing, I want them to listen. I want to listen to people and not judge, not prejudge, not put in the box, but just listen to human beings and see who they are, and see what they're really saying, and see where they're really coming from. If that's all I accomplish on this program, I think that will be something very significant for our future rabbinic leadership. I mean, I'm hoping to do a lot more, but that to me would be massive.
And also, I think the message that, certainly philosophically speaking, regardless of what labels you put on someone, regardless of what life choices a Jewish person makes, every single Jew is considered to be equally valuable, important, and necessary to God on a philosophical level. So why should we treat any Jew differently?
Absolutely. I remember my Rabbi Weinberg, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Aish in Jerusalem. He always used to say that he had a few catchphrases. But one of them he talked about was, he used to say that if the greatest rabbi in the world, whoever it might be at the time, an old man, a holy old man with a white beard, who spent his life studying Torah and teaching Torah and doing acts of kindness and charity, and if somebody puts a gun to his head and says to him, kill this person or I'll kill you, and that person who he is being asked to kill is a drunken, good for nothing, wife-beating, thieving scoundrel, who does nothing with their life and only does harm and bad, halacha says, Jewish law says that you can't kill him. He has to die. Why? Because the Gemara clearly states, you don't know whose blood is redder. You don't know whose blood is redder in God's eyes. And that's such a powerful statement, because surely you know whose blood is redder. Surely in such a circumstance, you know whose blood is redder. Surely you know who's the greater human being, who's the holier person, who's the more precious soul in God's eyes. And the Talmud says unequivocally that you don't. You just don't know. You just don't know people's backgrounds. You don't know their challenges. You don't know why they're doing what they're doing, what's motivating them. It's impossible for us to judge another person. And as you say, there is, I would say two things. Firstly, it's impossible to know. But secondly, on a certain level, we are souls. Souls are of infinite value. We can't compare infinites. You can't say, well, this infinite's bigger than that infinite. Infinites are infinites, and they don't lend themselves to comparison.
Yeah. I think it's such an important message to get across. Let's jump to the next topic, which is prayer. I personally think big changes and just a re-evaluation of how we conduct spiritually engaging events and communal gatherings for Jewish people and Jewish prayer, we really need a rethink, because so many people will go to shul, go to synagogue, and they will not walk out with their heads held a bit higher, feeling a bit, well, they might feel their heads held high in terms of they did the right thing, but in terms of feeling spiritually elevated, uplifted. Some people, if they put the work in themselves and they try to study what they're saying, that's an important part. But even then, there's a lot of rushing, and it takes a lot of effort to really get in the zone. And I think more can be done, both in terms of helping us understand the text, but also rethinking the service itself, in order to make it easier for people to just, connect to what's being said, connect to something spiritual. And it's not like this is beyond the wit of man, because it occurs in other settings, both secular or religious, whether it's meditative, whether it's concerts. There are ways of helping people to feel more connected and elevated, and I know some people do feel that when it comes to shul, but a lot of people don't. And I'm not for one second trying to say we should do away with what the sages instituted, but perhaps in addition to that, or within that, there surely has to be ways of making it more engaging. So I wanted you to speak a bit about this, because you've written a whole book about prayer, Mean What You Pray. I wondered if you could talk to us about this issue, how we can make prayer, both on a personal level for Jewish people and also within the shul setting, more engaging.
Yes, so let me talk about the shul setting first, if I may, and then I'll come to the personal one, because my book is more about the personal side of things. There was a time in Jewish history, and I think we live in a challenging time in Jewish history as a result of this, when the rabbis of the time, or the rabbis of each generation, felt they had the authority to tailor customs and ways of doing things to that particular generation. So when prayer first started, there was no official prayers, there was no mandated prayers, there was no service. The service that we have today was put in place by the men of the Great Assembly 2,500 years ago, and prior to that, every person would pray whatever they felt they wanted to pray. And there was and everybody would be praying something different, and there was no communal sort of agreed upon service as we have today. For one reason or another, at that time, the rabbis deemed it appropriate to create a communal service, and we Jews have trust in our rabbis of previous generations that they kind of knew what they were doing, perhaps even better than we did. However, the way Jewish society is meant to work is that the rabbinical authorities of a particular generation look at the needs of that generation and can change things if necessary, can sort of adapt Judaism to a particular generation without changing halacha. And there's a subtlety and there's a nuance to it. And that was done for thousands of years. In recent times, and I couldn't pinpoint a time when things changed exactly, that hasn't been done anymore. There's a fear of doing that, and we're a little bit stuck. We're stuck in customs and ways of doing things that can become dated and don't update for the particular generation that we're in. And I think that makes it very challenging. That makes Judaism very challenging. Now there's ways and means of sort of tiptoeing around it and finding ways to do things a little bit differently, but the wholesale changes that might be needed are not really available to us nowadays. What we really need is perhaps a different level of rabbinic leadership, perhaps people would say a different level of greatness of rabbinic leadership, and that would feel confident and comfortable to do what needs to be done. A different level of boldness maybe in rabbinic leadership. Whichever way I look at it and whatever it might be, that is what, in my mind, is really necessary. And in the absence of that, the best we can do is try and work within the bounds of what we have, work within the structure of what we have. And I think the best thing we can do with prayer nowadays is to create what I would call introductory services for people, whereby, yes, you might have the main shul, which is the official service, which people who are more experienced or more comfortable with the shul service would go to. But you would have parallel to that, and I do see this in some shuls, not very many, a service that people would go to who don't feel comfortable with that service, who don't yet feel capable of engaging on that level, and you would have a very stripped down service that explains a lot more, that has perhaps more singing in it, that has more meaning in it and more of a feeling of connection in it. And I think that now ultimately, if you took people through that kind of process and then sort of shifted them into the main service, I think they would be able to gradually sort of graduate into a main service and find it much more meaningful. But if you throw people into a service who don't really know Hebrew, don't really know what the prayers mean or what the purpose of the prayers are, don't really know how the siddur works and what the whole process is, and expect them to have a meaningful and uplifting experience, I think you've got no chance. And I think it's and you see that indeed, as you say, that's what happens. So that to me, I would love to see changes like that to communal prayer. So for example, I run a service every Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that is what I call an introductory service. It's about an hour long, hour to an hour and a quarter long, pretty much all in English. It's just highlights of the service. We do a lot of singing as well. I do a lot of explaining, and people come to that and have in my experience, at least that's what they tell me, they keep coming back. They have a very, very, very meaningful experience, and it's very touching and uplifting for them. And I think for the vast majority of Jews out there, that's what's necessary and that's what's needed.
But don't you think in addition to that, there are people, maybe this is just my false interpretation, but people who even do know what they're saying and did grow up with a strong religious background and orientation, but the nature of the service just leads them not to engage with it so much, or maybe they haven't learned so much about what's being said. But even that, it's quite a tall order to, on a 3 times a day basis, go through a huge amount of text. I mean, maybe this is just me, but to say that with, intensity and connection, I think, look, for some people, clearly it does do the trick, but for others, it's quite a challenge. And I wonder whether, even people, I find people that go to those kind of explanatory, introductory services that you talk about, even if there are people who do have all the background and knowledge, they walk out in many ways having had a more engaged, uplifted experience, intense experience. So just, I wonder what your thoughts were for even the regulars.
Yeah, I would say 2 things on that. I would say just because a person has been going to shul for the last 20 years and reading what it says in the siddur does not mean he's graduated to a level of prayer becoming a spiritual experience. I would say even somebody like that should go through a process like that, whereby they to me, those guys are beginners. Even if they've been coming to shul and praying for the last 50 years, they're still beginners because they haven't been praying for 50 years. They've been coming to shul and saying some words in a language that doesn't mean anything to them, and feeling nothing when they do it, for the most part. So yes, 100%. I would suggest and recommend that they go through some sort of process like that as well. And I would also say, and I said this earlier, but I'll say it more clearly, and I know that there are colleagues of mine that will disagree with this, but I'm not saying that, and let me say from the outset, there isn't a way of doing this as our community stands and as our rabbinic leadership stands. But I do believe things need changing. I do believe that if you look through the generations, as the press service has developed, things have been added on, and another thing was added, and nothing was ever taken away. And so now you have a press service, a morning service, let's say, where if you take the morning service, a regular weekday morning service, if you want to say that with meaning and feeling and connection and engagement, it could take you a couple of hours.
Yeah.
Take a couple of hours to do that. There's a lot in that.
Yeah.
So what do people choose to do instead? Well, let's just zoom through it. Let's just run through it quickly. Well, yeah, there's something to be said for Jewish ritual and going through the motions and doing the right thing, and I'm not going to say that there's anything wrong with that, but it's an impossible choice.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It's just such a tall order. For me personally, maybe there are some people out there who connect to everything they're saying, but within to get through so much in such a short space of time. And even the point that you make about, let's say, and we'll talk a bit about your book and understanding the text more. But even in those cases where, let's say, I've already been informed on the meaning behind the text, in the same way that it's important to recite a mantra over and over, or listening to music, if I think back to the music or the feeling I felt or whatever, it doesn't do the same as hearing it again. I do think there's something about being in a group collectively, and someone is leading the way and helping to remind people of what the meaning is of this, or to say something short and simple, but to and to repeat it, and to do things that just help pave the way for people to connect more with what is being said. I think, do you not think that would be important? As in, it's not enough just to study it and then say, right, well, now I know what it all means. That's not really. It's still an experience.
Absolutely, 100%. I would agree with you. But if you had a service that was, let's say, 25 minutes long, but 25 minutes of really meaningful engagement, so it was shorter than it would be now. It was way shorter. And if you did it really meaningfully and really connectedly, it would take you 25 minutes. I think you would have a lot more people coming to shul, and I think you'd have a lot more people going out of shul with a more uplifted feeling.
And ultimately, isn't that the whole point? Isn't the whole point of prayer? Do you want to talk to us a bit about what is the mitzvah itself of prayer? How does it manifest, and what is sort of what's the purpose of it, and how I know it's described as like the avodat halev, the work of the heart, and sometimes I think, well, how does that work when you're zooming through something very quickly? But do you want to talk to us a bit about that, and the false assumption that I feel is like, well, I don't want to get in a whole rant about this, but we get more caught. I find a lot of people in the religious world get more caught up in, well, does he daven 3 times a day, as opposed to, does he have a meaningful davening experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Not just that. I'm sorry to say this, but I what I've chosen to do in my davening is to concentrate my efforts and my focus on the Amidah, on the Shemona Esrei, which is really the essence of Jewish prayer. That's what it's all about. That's everything else is sort of built around that, other than the Shema, which is a separate mitzvah itself, but everything else is built around the Amidah. And that's where I put my energy and my effort. And the rest of the davening, I just kind of rush through it like everybody else does. And I don't, because to me, better that if I try and focus on the whole davening, I know it's just going to be overwhelming for me, and I'm just going to not do any of it. Which I think happens to a lot of people. So I'm very happy not to have really any meaning or any intention or any feeling. If I get some, it's a bonus in all the rest of the davening. But the Amidah, that for me is my davening. That's my focus. That's my time. So I'll say the rest of it like a good boy, as one should halachically. But my personal time of relationship with God is my Amidah. I spend a long time on it. And I find that not only, and I don't know, this is just a feeling I get, so, I might be totally wrong, but the feeling I get is not only is that not looked upon as praiseworthy, people think it's a little weird. It's like, what's this guy doing davening so long? Come on, it's a bit arrogant, you're davening that long. And, it's what I'll try and do even is I'll try and daven in a different part of the room or around the corner somewhere or somewhere else, because I find there's a little bit of judgment around it, and so I want to stay away from it. I want to be with the minyan, make sure I'm with the minyan halachically, but on my own, to be able to daven my Amidah, so no one's looking at me and watching me, and I just to me it's a personal thing. It's a very personal thing that I don't want other people involved in or to feel uncomfortable with other people around. So and 100%, what we need to do is we need things need to be different, things need to change. I can't remember the exact question you were asking.
Well, specifically, I just wanted to know about, just to help us understand the purpose. I mean, obviously, it's not for us to say why God institutes a mitzvah, like the ultimate reason. But talk to us about the nature of it. What is the obligation?
Well, I'll tell you something interesting that you're going to find fascinating, Ollie, and that is that if you look in the Gemara, and if you look in the Rishonim, the early commentaries on the Gemara, up until the time of the Torah was after the Rambam, after Maimonides was the next code of Jewish law. Torah lived in about the 1300s. Up until then, the halacha was, and you'll see this in the Rambam, if you don't think you're going to have kavanah in your davening, if you don't think you can feel it, if you don't think you can feel connected in your davening, you shouldn't daven. And the Gemara itself says that, for example, if you've just been on a journey and you've come back from a journey, you've been traveling, you shouldn't daven for 3 days after you came back from a journey, because your head won't be in the right place. You're busy-minded, and being busy-minded, how can you have focus and how can you have intent in your davening? The Gemara also says a halacha that if a person davened and didn't have kavanah and didn't have intent and didn't have feeling when they davened, so you davened, as happens a lot of the time with a lot of people, and you're in the beach in the Bahamas and while you're davening, and that's the way your mind is, you should daven again. You didn't daven. That prayer is the intent, prayer is the feeling. Prayer, whereas with all other mitzvahs, we say mitzvahs trichas kavanah, mitzvahs need kavanah. What that means is you need to know that you're doing a mitzvah. If I'm busy doing something else and somebody comes and puts the tefillin on me, I didn't even notice, I didn't do a mitzvah. I need to be aware that I'm doing a mitzvah. A tefillah, prayer, needs a different kavanah. It needs the kavanah of the feeling of the mitzvah itself, a kavanah of the connection, a kavanah of the fact that I'm speaking to God, that I'm relating to God, that I'm connecting to God, that I'm in God's presence. If you don't feel that, you didn't pray. Now came along the Torah and changed that all around in the 14th century. And that this change in halacha, and that's why I said that the rabbis, there was a time when rabbis would change halacha and adapt it to the needs of the generation. He said basically that if you have those halachas now, if you had the halacha, if you didn't daven with kavanah, you should daven again. Everyone will be davening all day. I davened and I didn't have kavanah. Okay, we'll try again. They didn't work that time. Okay, we'll try again. They'd be doing nothing else. And equally, if you had the kavanah of, if you had the halacha of, if you're not going to have kavanah, don't daven, well, nobody would be davening at all. So, I'm not going to have kavanah today, so we'll daven tomorrow. Oh, I'm stuck today as well. We'll get around to it next week. So he changed those halachas, and he made the halacha, which is the halacha that comes down to us to this day, that even if you didn't have kavanah, you shouldn't daven again. And even if you don't think you're going to have kavanah, you should still daven. Now that's changed the whole nature of davening. That was a bold change in the halachic structure and the halachic nature of the Jewish people. But it does not change the fundamental halacha that the essence of davening is the intent. The essence of davening is the feeling. As you said, avodah shebelev. It's service that is within the heart. It doesn't. The davening is not on the lips, and it's not on the tongue, and it's not in the body. The place that davening happens is in the heart. It's not the words that you say, it's the feeling that those words come with or point you towards. And to me, a lot of that has been lost. And that's a real shame. It's not ideal. The Torah never said that the ideal thing that a person should do is daven without kavanah. He said, even if you're not going to, you should still do it. But of course you should do it. Of course you should have kavanah. Don't not have kavanah anymore. That would be ridiculous.
And that's really the point. That it seems to be that the ikar, the key thing here, is about the feeling that is brought through prayer, and therefore, if that's the fundamental part, it seems just obvious to me and a priority for us to rethink the prayer services in order that we are not, saying, in order to allow us to say them with more heartfelt and more connection. There's plenty more to speak about this subject, but we obviously have limited time. So
I just wanted to add one thing there, if I might, and that is the point about people davening themselves, and that's really what my book is about. To me, there are people out there who really genuinely want to daven with more kavanah, want more feeling, but don't necessarily know how to do it because it's not necessarily talked about. That's what my book is speaking to such a person. I've written a book for somebody who really wants to connect and really wants to find meaning in their own personal prayers, but just doesn't know how to do it, or doesn't know how to do it well enough, or would like to improve on doing that. And I think that's something really important as well. And I think that group of people is a group of people that I want to speak to.
Definitely. So get the book, Mean What You Pray, by Rabbi Shaul Rosenblatt. Okay, so the next topic that I wanted to speak about is the matter of Jewish outreach. Because you have been involved in that for many decades now. If it wasn't for Jewish outreach organizations, I don't know if I'd be gone down the life path that I've gone down today. And so I'm incredibly grateful to the work they do. But and we've discussed this previously on JTV, and I think some of the issues that occur that we've discussed that surround Jewish outreach can occur in any type of organization or person that tries to influence opinion and try to bring people from point A to point B in terms of their perspective, or at least to help them to understand a different perspective. But I wanted to. We had a conversation about this off air, and I wondered if you could talk to us on air about what you think some of the key ethical issues that need to be that people involved in Jewish outreach ought to consider and have at the forefront of their mind. And I wondered if you could just sort of share with us some of those things, because I think they're really critical, and I suspect most people will resonate and agree.
Sure. And let me just say, as you did, that I myself am a product of, so to speak, of Jewish outreach, and I am massively grateful for being where I am today. The fact that there were organizations or there were individuals that were reaching out and encouraging young Jews to get involved. I come from a fairly secular background. I didn't keep kosher. I didn't keep Shabbat. I had a non-Jewish girlfriend. I'm sure I would have married out. My sister married out. So I was very disconnected from the Jewish community. And it's only because of Jewish outreach that I became involved. And really, that's what drove me to spend so much time and so much energy and so much effort over the years in Jewish outreach, because I felt very grateful. And I felt it was something I wanted to share with others. And I found two outreach organizations in this country and spent a lot of time and energy developing them and engaged in them, raising money for them and educating within them. So I have, as you say, a long history in it. However, I have felt over recent years that we've gone a little bit astray, if I may say so. And yeah, I feel we've gone a little bit astray, and I feel that there are a number of areas where that's evident, and that I think that really those in outreach, and I wouldn't necessarily put myself in that role nowadays. I'm trying to train people who might go into outreach, but I don't have an active role in outreach per se for the past 3 or 4 years, even though I did for the previous 30 years. I would say firstly that we need to look at the people who are engaging in the outreach process, and I think that the people that we want to choose to do that. I took my rabbis recently to a mosque, and we met with a sheikh, and this sheikh is somebody who you would say is in outreach, Muslim outreach. That's kind of what he does. Given his explanation of how he spends his time, that's exactly what he's doing. And this guy was a real human being. This guy was the real deal. This guy was humble. This guy was modest. This guy was wise. This guy was deep. He was genuine. You felt he was human as well. You felt he was a role model as a person. And it really made me feel like it's a shame that a lot more of our outreach rabbis couldn't be like that. He wasn't charismatic. He wasn't magnetic. He didn't have necessarily a wonderful personality and sense of humor. But to me, those aren't the things that matter. I think sometimes in outreach, that's what the focus is. That's what the superstars are. The superstars are the people with the charisma and the energy and the enthusiasm and the excitement and the intelligence and the genius and the brilliance and the who knows what. But to me, those are all superficial qualities. I think if we want to attract a younger generation of Jews to Judaism, I think we will attract them ultimately through role models. I think they want to see authenticity. I think they want to see a realness in human beings, and I think that's what's important. I think we've gone a little bit away from that. That I would say is number one. I would say along similar lines, and it kind of relates to that, is I think a lot of outreach can be about emotional highs, about giving people an exciting, thrilling, emotional experience, but not necessarily something that is sustainable. And I think there's a danger in that. There's a danger in selling them a product that isn't what's going to be the product in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time. I always say that outreach, what's important in outreach, if you want to get people to be engaged Jewishly and become more religious, it's much more important what they're doing in 50 years' time than what they're doing in 6 months' time. This is a long-term deal, long-term commitment.
If I can just pick you up on that briefly, and then you can carry on with your some of the other issues. But just to briefly pick up on this, because I do think about this matter of, emotionally intense experiences that people may experience when they let's say go on a Jewish outreach trip or whatever it is, event or a trip to Poland, and I do understand it's not sustainable. It might not be sustainable to make people think that this is this is going to be your Jewish experience the whole time. Of course not. But I don't necessarily think that they don't have a place because I certainly don't see it necessarily as manipulative, which is what I feel like some other people might try to categorize it as. So, for example, I went on a Poland trip, and there were things that occurred. Me with 50 other Jewish students, standing by one of the train stations where hundreds of thousands of Jews were deported, and singing a song from Psalms, and some of the rabbis and speakers talking, getting very emotional and crying. One person might look at that, so you'd say, well, that's real emotional manipulation to make us feel these deep things. But I feel it's being real. Like this was incredibly. It was one of the greatest tragedies of all time, what happened in Poland. And as someone that studied history, I would sometimes say to people, let's say there are two people. One person hears on the news or is told by secondhand that there was a child that was run over by someone on the road, God forbid, and they read it and they're like, oh God, it's terrible, whatever. And then there's another person who's a first-hand witness. Now, they saw it actually happen, they saw everyone screaming and crying, and they are way more emotional about it. But who had the more objective or clear understanding of what occurred? Let's say, in terms of documenting what happened, the second person. But they're more emotional because that's a natural human response. So I don't always feel it is a manipulative thing. I know that's a slightly side point, but I wanted just to get your thoughts on that, because I do often hear this brought up as an issue.
Yeah, I think it's a fine line, and I think it's you have to be very careful when walking that line. And I don't know that people are careful with it. I don't know that people realize that it doesn't take much to step over that line for it to become something that's manipulative. If you talk about Poland in particular, I someone can argue with me this and tell me they did one earlier, but I think I ran possibly the first outreach trip to Poland in 1995, I think it was, almost 30 years ago. And I was running trips to Poland when nobody else was. And I reflected back on what I was doing, and I took a very different approach. And here's what I think might be the difference. But I'm happy to, there's more to it than we can discuss in just a kind of a 2-minute conversation. I think the question is, are you putting people in a position, having a conversation with them, and then letting them feel what they feel, which might actually be nothing, or are you pushing the feeling on them? Or are you trying to get them to feel something? Do you have a destination that you're going to and you're really trying to push them there? And I learned something from kind of my first trip to Poland. I recall, I went to Poland for the first time in 1987 when I was 21. And at that time, I was studying at Asia Torah in Jerusalem, and I just had this deep-seated need to go and experience the camps. And Poland was communist in those days. It was not at all easy to go there. And I went around the yeshiva to get somebody to come with me. There wasn't a single person out of 120 people that was willing to come with me. They all said, why would you want to do that? It's ridiculous. Why would you want to bother? I went and asked friends. I asked family. Couldn't get anybody to come with me to Poland. So I went on my own. And that trip is kind of an interesting experience in and of itself. And anyway, I remember going to Birkenau. And if you go to Birkenau nowadays, I mean, you say you've been, so you probably know what it's like. That you'll meet hundreds, if not thousands, of people there, and lots of Israeli groups with all the flags, the Israeli flags draped around them. It's a very, very, very busy place, Birkenau nowadays. When I went, I was the only person there. I was one person in this giant camp. And I remember going in there on my own, lying down in the middle of one of the fields there, and I just cried for about 45 minutes. I just cried and cried and cried. And it was such a powerful experience for me. It was so meaningful for me. When I took my first group, that was 8 years later now. So I had maybe 20 young Jews, and we got the bus to Birkenau, and I prepared them, and I said, look, we're going to this place now, and this is a very powerful place and very meaningful in Jewish history, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, get off the bus and go there, and I'm just going to prepare some stuff. And I was getting out some candles and a chauffeur and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they all went. And I get there, and they're all standing there in front of the gates, the gates where the train goes through, and taking pictures of themselves, selfies, oh, let me get a picture here, let me get a picture of this. And I was like, I was angry. I was actually angry. I was like, how can you do that? This is blasphemous. This is utter and gross disrespect for what happened over here. And it took me a while, you grow older and you learn and you see more. It took me a while to realize that that's very judgmental of me. People need to go through their own experiences. People need to take things in their own way. People need to have an experience in the way that's appropriate for them. And the process needs to be their own process. And so I've done lots of Poland trips. I've done 40 or so Poland trips over my time. I would never want to try and get somebody to feel something. I would hope that the soul inside of them feels something. I would hope that the narrative that they hear, I would hope that what they're seeing with their own eyes would move them. But if it doesn't, it's not my job to make that happen. And I think that's when you get to you border on manipulation, when you have an emotional destination that you want someone to get to, and you push them towards it.
Well, but
I think it's subtle. It's subtle and it's nuanced.
We were just talking about davening and creating, services that help people connect more. So why is that an issue here? If you're, doing things like, where do you draw the line with emotional manipulation? Like, for example, students all, singing a song that quotes Psalms that are something, that's emotional experience. Is that manipulative? To me, it just it creates an avenue for connection.
This is a broader issue than we have time for in this particular, discussion. Happy to just do something on that alone. But I think it's subtle and it's nuanced, and I don't think that I can just, answer those questions. I think I need to say a lot more about what I see is education, what I see the difference between education and manipulation is. And I do have a very strong and thought through perspective on that. But I don't think I can just kind of throw it out there. I would want to do it justice if we were going to discuss it properly, and I wouldn't, I don't feel it's the time or place to do that.
Sure. It sounds like what the key thing, though, that you consider manipulative is when you're trying to get someone to a particular destination.
Yeah, that's right. An emotional destination, yeah, or a destination in the way they are, in the way they live their life. I feel both of those, I would say, are agenda driven. I think you've got to be very careful. And that was the next thing I was going to say, actually, is you have to be very careful not to have an agenda. I think if you're not careful in outreach, you can get a holier than thou attitude of us and them, of I am the person who knows everything, I'm the all-knowing, who has my head screwed on straight and has my life going in the right direction, and everybody else is just lost souls who haven't got a clue and who just don't know what's going on with their life.
From versus not from.
Yeah, well, basically, you can encapsulate it in that, exactly. And to me, it comes down to, and you'll often hear people say this, I'll ask somebody, are you from? And they'll say to you, it depends on what you mean by from. And I think that's really important. What does being from mean? What does being Torah observant do you mean? You can't tell me it's somebody who's keeping all the mitzvot, because nobody keeps all the mitzvot. They're not. We're all human. We're all going to make our mistakes. We're all going to have the things that we get tripped up in. So nobody's doing them all. We're all going to have moments. Pardon?
I am.
There you go. Other than you, Ali. We're all gonna have our moments where we get angry when the Torah says don't get angry, where we speak Lashon Hara when the Torah says don't speak Lashon Hara, where we wake up late when the Torah says no, you got to be at the minyan in the right time, whatever it might be. So we all come a cropper with these things. So what does it mean to be from? And for a person to have this little box. I recall there have been outreach organizations that I've been involved with in the past. They have a definition. What's our goal? Shabbos, family purity, and kashrus. That's what we're trying to do. Trying to get someone to do those three things. Now, number one, those are all quite superficial things, and you'll tell me, well, you can't judge other than through superficial things. Number two, they're all between man and God. That's true, and what Judaism doesn't have anything to do with other human beings. And number three, it's a very narrow definition. It's a very narrow definition, and it's not an individual definition. It's a definition. It's a broad definition. There's no personalization in there. There's no, well, what if somebody really relates to the mitzvah of tzitzis and doesn't really connect to Shabbos at this point in their development, at this point in their growth, at this point in their engagement in Judaism? No. Shabbos is what they've got to do, not tzitzis. Forget your tzitzis. Do Shabbos.
I'll tell you what I find one of the most disturbing things, which is commonplace. And again, I always have to caveat this by saying I'm hugely in favour of Jewish outreach when it's done the right way. But we need to address with the issues, and we mustn't just push things under the carpet. And one of the things that I see happening that is disturbing is where you'll have people involved in outreach, and they will draw someone in, inspire them, and then once that person has become a certain level of observance, they stop investing the time. They don't have time for them anymore, and they'll tell you're on your own now. They say, well, it's the responsibility of the observant world and you've got to figure out your own thing. And it's sort of what ends up happening is the relationship is that is somewhat manipulative. It's because it's treating someone as a means to an end.
Yeah.
For my spreadsheet or for my that one more person is Shomrei Shabbos, whatever. It makes the relationship unhealthy, and I know people, and I can speak from personal experience, where you can end up feeling a bit abandoned.
Yeah. This is a crass and highly inappropriate parallel, but it's what comes to me. So I'll say it because it comes to me. It's like on the wagons on the way to the camps, they would write the numbers of the people in the wagon. There's 121 people in this wagon, and you want to count them when they come out, make sure there's 121, nobody escaped. It's like, it's numbers. It's just a numbers game, and Judaism has never been a numbers game. It really hasn't, and I think it's highly, highly inappropriate that we turn ourselves into a numbers game, and it's really not what it's about. And I would say more than that. I would say, there's a famous thing that I love, when you look historically, but Beryl Wine really I don't know if you know Rabbi Beryl Wine, but a historian. He really encapsulated this very beautifully. He said that that when at the time of Abraham, Judaism was an inch wide, only an inch wide, but it was a mile deep. The roots were a mile deep. He says at the time of the Enlightenment, Judaism was a mile wide, but it was only an inch deep. And the whole thing fell apart. The whole thing collapsed with the Enlightenment. It's not numbers. It's not superficiality. It's not how many kosher restaurants there are. It's not how many shuls there are in an area. And it comes back to the prayer thing. It's the quality of engagement. It's the feeling. It's the relationship with God. It's the meaning that people find in it. It's the commitment they have. It's the genuineness. It's the authenticity. Coming back kind of full circle to what I said at the beginning. And I think that's what we should be looking for. And to me, if you can engage a very small number of people and really engage in a focused, meaningful, human way and get people to engage and go on a journey together, and you take them through a very healthy process of outreach, a very individualistic outreach, a process of outreach, but you only get 5 or 6 people as opposed to the 500 people that you want coming to the classes. I feel that it's quite possible in my mind. I don't want to state it as an absolute black and white, but that is a much more meaningful thing to do. That's a much more meaningful way of going about doing it.
Well, as I heard the Lubavitcher Rebbe once say when he was asked, someone reached out saying, I'm doing this class on mothers and have a big community, and only three people showed up, and I'm so disappointed. And he said Moses only had one mother. So I agree. We have to stop thinking about numbers, and also what does it mean that just someone going to one talk or one trip, even if you don't see anything externally, it may have made a huge impression on them in ways you can never know. And the other thing I find that is so interesting, I've had a shift in terms of, the Chabad groups will do Mivsoyim, where they'll go and get offer tefillin or for men to do, or for Shabbat candles they hand out to Jewish women. And I used to think, what does this achieve long term? Someone that's not really connected there, they put on tefillin and they go, and they don't take their numbers down, they don't take their details, there's no sign up and let's take them on a journey. And I realized this is actually a very healthy kind of way of doing things, because it's not about treating someone as a means to an end. It's saying, you're a Jew, I'm a Jew, be Jewish, do Jewishness just like I do it, and I'm not trying to take you anywhere. I'm just take responsibility for your Judaism, and that's it. And I think that's the approach. So what do you think is the key mantra or theme that needs to be at the forefront of people's minds whenever they are engaged in Jewish outreach?
Authenticity, humility, and love. Those are the things that occur to me. And I think if you have those 3 things, you won't go wrong. I think you'll figure out what to do. If what you're doing is based on those 3 things, then I think what will come out will be good. I don't know the details of how it will come out, but I think it'll come out right.
Great. And lastly, we've really only got a few minutes left, and I'm really, again, grateful for your time. But just wanted to touch briefly, if we could, because I know this is something that you've given a great deal of thought to. The matter of suffering and dealing with suffering and pain that life throws at us, that God, throws at us. And I don't mean that in a throwing at us in a harsh, wrathful way, but he does, make us go through certain experiences. Why you wrote a book called "Why Bad Things Don't Happen to Good People"? What are some of the main messages of that book?
Well, I would say the main message is the title. I say the title encapsulates the main message, which is that what is bad. You have this classical, philosophical dilemma of why do bad things happen to good people, and there's a loving God or a just God. How could he allow such things to happen? And And to me, the way I approach it, the way I tackle it is, well, you have to have your definitions. What is bad, and in simple terms, I expand on this significantly in the book, but in simple terms, in Judaism, the only thing that we call good, the only thing that Judaism calls good is God. That is true good. And for human beings, the only good that we can aspire to is relationship with God. And hence the only thing that we would call bad is distance from God. And I pose the question in the book, is there any event that can happen to a human being in this world that will make them distance from God, just the event itself, without forgetting their response to the event, that the event itself can make them distance from God? And you see, practically speaking, and if you want to take the simplest, the most obvious one is the Holocaust. And I've met many, many Holocaust survivors over the years, and broadly speaking, they fall into two categories. And I wouldn't like to say which is the bigger one of the people that I've met. You have the people who say the Holocaust took them away from God, or they don't believe in God anymore. And then you have the people who say the Holocaust brought them closer to God. And to me, that one event in Jewish history, and that one kind of experience that we Jews had of suffering and hardship, and the dramatically different responses people have had to that, shows me that it's not happening. They don't happen. Bad things don't happen to anybody. Good people or bad people or anybody else. Bad people, bad things, what we would call distance from God, and without judgment. It's very hard to know what people go through and the challenges and hardships they go through in life. You take the Holocaust as an extreme, but you even take somebody who I don't know, loses a bit of money and turns away from God because of that. You don't know the human suffering. You can't judge another human being what that suffering meant to them, and say, well, you're being a baby about it. Well, maybe if you went and responded in that way, you would be being a baby. But for them, this is something really challenging and really hard, and something they need support and love in, not judgment. But I don't believe bad things happen. I believe bad things come out of our responses to what happened, not of the events themselves. And I believe that every event in our lives is neutral, and we get to choose. And that's the beauty of this world. That's the greatness of this world. That's the greatness of the gift the Almighty has given us in this world, is we have free will, and we get to choose where the experiences in our lives take us. And it's as Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage and we're really actors upon it. And we all get different. Some people get comedies, some people get tragedies, some people get mixtures of the two and histories. Whatever we get, what we do with it is ours to make of it. And we can make wonderful things, anything that comes our way, and we can make hell and nightmares out of anything that comes our way as well. And that is the essence of kind of what I'm trying to point towards in the book.
Absolutely, and it's a world of possibility. And I think one of the things that I'm starting to learn as I, go through the years and mature, is that we sometimes paint negative worst-case scenario narratives in our head, and sometimes things don't. Often they don't develop in the terrible way we thought they might. And so learning to that and understanding that there's always a myriad of possibilities in how things can develop should encourage us in that sense of always trying to find a positive response, a constructive way forward in whatever comes away, because we just don't know how things are going to develop. Rabbi, thank you so much for your time. Really grateful. Please do consider getting Rabbi Rosenblatt's books, Mean What You Pray and Why Bad Things Don't Happen to Good People. Rabbi, would love to do another session with you at some point. Really appreciate you coming on JTV.
Pleasure.
And
really pleasure.
Hatzlacha with all the work you do.
Amen. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Ollie.